Thank you for your consideration of this bill. The indisputable fact that hundreds of Australian babies survive abortion, are born alive but left to die, often in harrowing circumstances, is without a doubt one of the most significant human rights issues of our day. The Northern Territory Coroner's report into the death of baby Jessica Jane provides some insight into what occurs. Following being aborted, Jessica Jane was born alive and placed on a metal kidney dish in an empty room for approximately 80 minutes until she died. According to Nurse Williams, who delivered her, Jessica Jane, although premature, was apparently healthy, had no apparent abnormalities, and her vital signs were relatively good. She weighed 515 grams. When the doctor who authorised the abortion was informed of the live birth and the baby's AGPAS scores were strong, his only response was to say, "So?" The nurse checked on her every 10 to 15 minutes and observed crying and movement, but the baby was left to die where she lay. The coroner stated that after an hour, her heartbeat and breathing slowed until death. In another case in Sydney, the New South Wales Deputy State Coroner said she was aware that many terminated fetuses live after they are expelled from the mother. She criticised hospital staff for failing to care for a baby born alive following an abortion, saying, "There is a serious issue which arose to the way in which the deceased was treated after signs of life were detected." Cases such as this are not rare. From 2010 to 2020 in Victoria and Queensland alone, over 700 babies were born alive and subsequently died following abortions. A baby every week. These babies are refused life-sustaining care, as would be the case for wanted babies at the same gestation. Unwanted, alive babies need an advocate. We recommend that this bill be strengthened further by including provisions for an advocate to be provided to any baby showing signs of life. This advocate should be from the relevant child protection authority in each state, thus alleviating the trauma the woman may experience in this situation, whilst providing an immediate authority to act in the child's best interests. This isn't a debate about abortion. This is a debate about whether or not the baby who is still alive following a medical procedure on its biological mother carries the same rights as other prematurely delivered babies. Is it your decision to give that baby a chance to live, or at least a chance to die peacefully with good palliative care if it's not viable? Or is it your decision to accept the withholding of medical care so the intent of the abortion is finalised as quickly as possible despite the living and breathing baby? To allow the passage of this bill is to give babies like Jessica Jane the chance to live, or if unviable, the chance to die peacefully. On behalf of our 250,000 supporters, the Australian Christian Lobby strongly supports the passage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pearce. Mrs. Francis, did you have comments as well?
No, that worked together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Canavan, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair. Look, thank you very much for your submission and for coming in here today. As you have outlined, this is tragic circumstances that do arise. What I still don't quite understand is what does happen. What are the practical or clinical guidelines here? Your submission quotes some guidelines in Queensland, but has your research uncovered a bit more at all about what are the practices? What happens in the circumstances when a baby is born alive after a termination procedure?
So there are different circumstances that happen. In some cases, and in a lot of cases,
thank you.
It is an unintended live birth. So in an unintended live birth, the baby is placed into a stereo dish, as happened with Jessica Jane, and nothing is done. They're just left to die. Sometimes these babies can cry up to an hour. We know that with Jessica Jane it was 80 minutes. So that's an unintended live birth. There are abortions that happen with an intended live birth because for one reason or another, the mother wants to hold that baby. Now, in those cases, that baby is still not given any palliative care. There is no resuscitation, no matter how viable the baby is, because the only result, I guess, of an abortion is a dead baby. But that baby still is an independent human being. And so there are times, Senator, when it is an intended live birth, and some, mostly, when it's an unintended live birth.
Okay, that's new, that's a bit new information to me. So can you take me through what do you mean by intended live birth, and what is the obviously there's if it's intended, there's a there's a procedure there, a process. What does that involve? What is the process there that ultimately ends in the termination of the baby's life?
So the baby is induced early, so it's a very premature baby.
Right.
But it's still, it's old enough to live. So obviously we're talking about babies born alive here. So we're talking about a baby probably post 22 weeks, and the baby is delivered prematurely. So the baby is induced in the same
And then
way.
left to die, effectively.
Yes.
So there's no drugs provided to that baby before
No, it's not allowed to
or after the delivery.
In some states, such as in Queensland, that's very clearly set out that there is to be no medical intervention for the baby.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that particular practice. I mean, we might drill into that later a bit more, but how is that not, that to me doesn't seem to be a termination procedure. That just seems infanticide, doesn't it? To induce a baby and then just let it die.
So in some cases, the mother may have been told, sometimes correctly, sadly, sometimes incorrectly, that the baby is going to be incompatible with life if it goes full term. So they are encouraged, or they decide themselves to end the baby's life prematurely so that they don't have to go to full term. So the baby is born. Usually in those circumstances, the baby would be incompatible with life. It's not always the case, sadly, and a terrible mistake has been made. But the baby is incompatible with life, and so in that instance, the baby would be wrapped and placed in the mum's arms and then just allowed to die.
Right. Okay. I was, when I first asked the question, I wanted to ask a bit more about the seemingly different approaches here. I mean, you have referenced in your submission and mentioned just before the Queensland Health Guidelines, which sort of say don't provide life-sustaining care. However, some other submissions that we've received indicate that pain relief is provided at some times. I can't find, though, anywhere where that's specifically outlined in procedures, but I don't dismiss the fact that perhaps it is sometimes the practice of some hospitals or clinics to administer pain relief. This is to a baby born alive. But what's your understanding of the specific policies here in this regard? What are nurses or doctors
So
told in these circumstances, and how does that translate into what happens in practice?
There would be no government legislation that I am aware of at all that would provide that ability to give pain relief. But you can understand that in a circumstance such as Jessica Jane that Michelle outlined to us so tragically, the nurse kept on checking on her every 10 or 15 minutes. The baby was crying, so the distress for Nurse Williams was great. Now, I'm sure there would be some hospitals that would provide the opportunity for a nurse in that situation to somehow alleviate her own sense of culpability for this baby dying. But there is no legislation. It's one of the reasons why we desperately need this legislation, because it would actually then, it would go state by state, territory and the two territories, and cover this situation, and it would allow the hospitals to have the right to do just what you've said. But I'm sure that if there is pain relief given, that is a hospital guideline that they would see. Most people who work in a hospital are naturally compassionate. That's why they're working in a hospital. So it would be a guideline from the hospital or from a particular unit.
But you're not aware of any guidelines that,
Not aware of any
publicly at least, that are available that would outline that.
No, and I know, for instance, Nurse Williams with the Jessica Jane case, she felt as if she couldn't. She said that she felt as if her hands were tied. That's how she felt. She didn't feel that she could give any assistance to this baby that was a viable baby. Independent.
Did she, in that case, the coroner's report, did it indicate that she'd asked superiors to whether some sort of assistance pain relief, some kind of medical intervention could be provided?
So the coroner's report says that Nurse Williams rang the doctor who had authorised the abortion, so he wasn't actually there. She rang the doctor who had authorised the abortion and told him that the baby was alive and that her vital signs were very good for a premature baby, and his answer was so, and he hung up. So that's the from the coroner's report. So we know that is right. We're not.
Was this in a hospital or was it a clinic?
It was in the Northern Territory, in a hospital in the Northern
hospital.
Territory, a clinic. But I think this is one of the really important things to make note of. So many times, if I talk to this about people and we're discussing it, people will say, this is a myth, it doesn't happen. But, we have coroner's reports saying that it happens. So it happens. And whether it happens to a few or whether it happens to a many, and I think we're somewhere in between that figure, it happens. And so there are laws that we've established for situations where it's not for many, but it's for a few. Zoe's law in New South Wales, for instance, like we've created a law to allow for babies killed in the womb by a violent act. So either a partner or an accident, the baby can be recognised. So we've created a law. It doesn't happen very often, but we see that there is it's applicable to create a law for something that does happen. And this perhaps, I would say, is right up there with one of the greatest human rights abuses of our time.
That's a good point, and at least the data that's been provided to this committee shows that this is happening at the very least every week in Australia, probably more because we don't have data from all states. And I just wanted to ask about that. So where do you get the data from currently? I see it seems to end in 2020. Is that just because we're waiting for more years to be updated, or we need to do something more proactively to get more recent data? And what about the other states? We seem to only have good data for Victoria and Queensland.
Can I just comment quickly? In
please.
Western Australia, I was looking into this about 7 years ago, and it took a Freedom of Information request to extract the data from the Department of Health. So there was no public reporting until Nick Goiran, Member of Legislative Council, began to ask questions in Parliament, of which we didn't get the information. So he had to go to Freedom of Information to be able to get those statistics.
George Christensen, when he had the previous bill in the previous government, he went to the Parliamentary Library. So we have the Parliamentary Library results. You've always got to ask for them because these are not easy to find. In Queensland, Mark Robinson, one of our members of Parliament, asked in Parliament for the results, and that's how we got the results. When the results came for Mark Robinson, it was actually quite a big news article on the TV news that night because it was so shocking to people. But it just seems to shut down all the time because people seem to say, look, it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. So I'm grateful, so grateful to you for having this inquiry even, because I think one thing it will do is shine light on, yes, this actually does happen. This really does happen, yeah.
I just, on this issue, in your submission, you mentioned that you think perhaps there could be the addition of new clauses to this bill before us to require the actual publication of relevant department statistics. I mean, there's some provision in this bill that sort of point to some statistics being produced, but can you just explain a bit more what you're proposing in addition to what's in the bill currently?
There's been a number of inquiries over the years that have impacted on the process of abortion. And in just about every case, whether it's state or federal, people who are pro-life and pro-choice, and don't even really like those terms, but you understand what I'm saying when I say that, pro-life, pro-choice, they all ask for better statistics because better statistics will help us help the women. That's what statistics will do, because the statistics help us to understand, is there more support that these women need? Are they getting the support that they need? Are there medical facilities that they need? So it's not this, the call for statistics is across the board. This is not just a, pro-life question. This is people from both sides of this debate are coming from a compassionate point of view in asking for statistics because they want to help the women.
I and I'm happy for you to, Chair, take back the call whenever. Here, I'll finish on this question. For now, the statistics about how often this occurs, and particularly the proportion of late-term abortions that end in the baby being born alive, there seems to be a huge variety in the statistics here. From my quick collection of what's been in submissions to us, I think the figure seems to be almost 30% in Queensland, 10% in Victoria, and there's another study that's often quoted that says 50%. So do you have any insights into what that number is? And also, given your experience here, and I know speaking to mums having to make these very difficult decisions, are mums given information at the time of a late-term abortion about the likelihood that the baby might actually survive the procedure and be alive after birth?
So in the intended live births, they are given that option.
Right.
In the unintended, it's a terrible shock for the mother. But I would say that even other forms of abortion, such as the abortion pill, is often a terrible shock to the mother, because when it's the abortion pill, for instance, she's on her own, the baby is born and she sees the baby, that's a terrible shock. So I think abortion carries with it a sense of shock no matter how it happens. But certainly the statistics that we've provided the committee are the only ones that we can get. I think sometimes they're underreported, sometimes they're not counted as a live birth. There are times when a baby might live for, like they might breathe for 4 seconds. And now we know that if a doctor is going to make the judgment as to whether this baby is viable if it's a wanted baby. So it's awful to put it like that. But if it's an unwanted baby, they don't even consider whether this baby is viable. But if a baby breathes for 3 or 4 seconds, then that is counted as a live birth. But obviously you're not going to all of a sudden try and resuscitate a baby that is not compatible with life. And that's not what that's not what the bill is about. The bill is about providing the same amount of care for every baby, treating every baby equal. If a baby is born, they are independent from their mother, and certainly the ICCPR rights that we all adhere to would definitely say that there is an inherent right to life and a right not to be deprived of that life. So if the baby is independent of the mother and the baby can be revived and looked after as any preemie baby, then every baby should be treated equally.
I would just suggest that the bill seeks to provide the same level of care for all human beings.
Yes.
I recognise that doctors and nurses and everybody involved has to make very difficult decisions sometimes, but that is the case in all stages of life potentially, and there's no reason why babies should be treated any lesser than the rest of us. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to. I've got more questions if needed.
Yeah, I'll pass the call to Senator Urquhart and then I'll come to you, Senator.
Thanks very much, Ms Francis and Mrs Pearce. I might start with, well, actually, I'll throw it out either of you.
And I'm answering a lot of the questions because I've been in Australia for the past 13 years. Michelle has just arrived from overseas.
No worries. Well,
she was involved.
I won't direct it to
both of us,
any one of you, but you're both happy to jump in if you wish. So
and she's my boss, so she'll talk over the top of me anyway.
Okay, no worries. You talked about guidelines. Can you tell me what your understanding is of the duties that health practitioners are currently subject to in carrying out termination of pregnancy?
So I can speak to Queensland because it's very clear in Queensland, and in Queensland the guideline is that they are not to give medical treatment. They are allow the baby to die. That's very clearly put into the guidelines.
And you're not aware of other states?
Many of the other states don't even touch on it. And can I say that many of the other states don't even want to really recognise that it's happening. It's just one of those unspoken things. In Queensland, there was a case of quite an advanced preemie baby that was left to die. And I approached the coroner and asked the coroner to do a report on this baby, but he refused at the time.
Okay. And then, so can you then tell me what your understanding of the duties that would be placed on health practitioners as a result of the passage of this bill if it was to pass?
So as Senator Canavan just said, it would be exactly what happens for any baby in that situation. So we know that there are many tragic circumstances where a baby is born premi and the decision has to be made quickly. Is this baby viable for life? Is this baby not? Now, if a woman who has got a pregnancy, she's fully expecting to go full term and all of a sudden something happens, she's rushed to hospital, the baby is born, there is an immediate decision by the doctor. Do we resuscitate? Do we put this baby in a humidity crib? Do we treat the baby? So we're just asking for the same care that would be given to any baby. At the moment, you'll have a hospital with, there's a hallway and there's rooms, and in one room, a baby born at 24 weeks is given every single bit of medical attention that our nation has. And in the room right next door, there could be a 24-week baby left to die without that treatment.
How do you think practitioners apply their clinical expertise and judgment?
How do they, sorry?
How do you think that practitioners apply their clinical expertise and judgment in those circumstances?
So my son is a paediatrician. They train very hard for this and they have clinical knowledge. So they immediately can ascertain. They might start working on a baby and then realise, no, this is not. I mean, we've got to somehow trust our doctors to know, and they do it all the time for premature babies. We want the same treatment for every baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess I just want to go back to the issue that you talked about palliative care. So do you understand that they can provide palliative care where relevant under existing guidelines and practices, or are you saying that that's not the case?
So certainly the only amount of palliative care that is in any of the guidelines in the states is that the baby can be wrapped.
In all of the states or?
Well, in any of the states I know, there is only one set of guidelines that I can find.
Right.
And those that's in Queensland.
That's the Queensland example, yep.
So the baby can be wrapped, but that's it. The guideline is very clear that no medical assistance is to be given.
Yeah. So does this bill, if this bill was to pass, do you think it overrides the trust that we have in our doctors?
No, I think it actually enables them. I would say completely the opposite, because we're not asking them to do anything that they don't already do. For a preemie baby. I think it's showing an enormous amount of trust in them, to be honest.
So what do you believe is the deficiency in existing law and clinical guidance that this bill resolves? Now, you've talked about it being treated. Just wondered if you could expand on that for me.
So I think we've got to go back to the ICCPR because of the international... So the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So it's our UN obligation. So we are a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We also are for the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So these are UN conventions. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights states that there's an inherent right to life, and that is not to be arbitrarily deprived. A human being is not to be arbitrarily deprived of that right. It also talks about the provision for the reduction of stillbirth and infant mortality. It talks about the reduction of infant mortality. In the International Convention on the Rights of the Child, it says that states parties recognise that every child has the inherent right to life. So I guess the question for us is a child that is born and it is separate from its mother, it's independent, is that a child or is it not? And unfortunately, if it's not a child, it's medical waste, and that's where it ends up. So we've got to decide, because the UN conventions that we are party to and we have signed state that every child has the inherent right to life. Is a baby born alive, even in a really tragic circumstance, a child? And if so, they have an inherent right to life. And that does not mean resuscitating or reviving a baby that is not compatible with life in the same way as a baby born premature would be. But if we agree that that is a child, then I can't see how we can possibly reject this bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Chair.
Thanks, Senator Urquhart. Senator Antic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your submission. I was just reminding myself of a couple of the points you make in there, and one of the things that always crosses my path when it comes to this issue is the lack of awareness out there in the community. I think when people understand that this is actually a practice that goes on and it's not rare, as you've outlined in some of your statistics, but do you have any, I think there was some polling, I think, done by YouGov, which I just trying to find there, I think it said something like 70% of Australians are just simply unaware that this practice goes on.
They are. The same YouGov poll also showed how many people oppose it. So the same YouGov survey showed a strong majority believed that it was 70%. It surprises me that it was that low, to be honest, but 70% believe that a baby who survives a late-term abortion should be cared for like any other premature baby. Said that only 10% of the voters disagreed and 19% said that they didn't know.
Yeah, I'm surprised that it was that low as well, given how difficult this subject matter is, and I would suggest that perhaps those 19% are reluctant 70%ers, I would have thought. But you mentioned about the doctors and the medical community in there. So I don't think you've mentioned that in your submission, but can you just take us through that again as well? What were the medical profession's view on this, according to any polling that's been done?
So the medical practitioners are the ones there on the ground. They are the ones dealing with this. And we hear many stories, some of whom we would love to bring in, of midwives who are just even going on stress leave. They are distressed so much because we have stories of midwives telling us that the baby, having been put in a stereo dish, is actually removed and put into a broom cupboard to try and remove the noise because the sound is so distressing of a baby crying and they're not allowed to help. The medical practitioners that I've spoken to, and they mainly are midwives, I have to say, they are like, please get this through that we can at least provide palliative care to these little ones.
Yeah. And we live in a world where every second person talks about evidence-based this and evidence-based that, evidence-based, and yet it seems so difficult to get the statistics, even though you've got people on the ground who are seeing it. I've spoken to them as well. Why is it so difficult, do you think? Why are the statistics so hard to come by? Is that a deliberate thing? Are we seeing statistics being buried or people being obfuscated from being able to find them? Is this something that perhaps is being, hidden from the public?
I think if the true statistics were to come out, Australians would be absolutely shocked. I think one of the reasons why the statistics on this particular practice is hidden is because people, and as Michelle said, people conflate it with the issue of abortion. Mm-hmm. And we're not trying to conflate this with the issue of abortion. We're talking about a live child. But I think that the concern for people and why they would try and hide it is that they are concerned that this will conflate the issue with abortion. So there's that reason. But also it is just across the board that we find it very hard to get abortion statistics. Now, one of these reasons is because there are some that are claimed through Medicare. There are some that are, the morning after pill. So there would be a certain grey area of numbers. But as I say, people who would identify as pro-choice, as well as ourselves who would identify more as pro-life, although I want women to have choice, to be honest. I want them to have real choice. We all just say we need better statistics. I don't know what the block is there, really, because it's something that's agreed across the board.
Excuse me, Senator Antic, I just need to let the committee know that Mr David De Lima from FamilyVoice Australia has now joined us and he's on teleconference. But please continue.
Thank you, Chair. We talked a little bit about some of those statistics before, but we didn't drill into them, and you've put some of those in your submission to this committee here. But they clearly are. There really is no argument to suggest this is rare. I know there was some work done by the Parliamentary Library, but this was information which was drawn out through the Victorian Consultative Council on Obstetric Paediatric Mortality and Morbidity, which that report showed that 43 babies from live births, regardless of gestation, died after birth as a result of abortions for suspected or confirmed congenital abnormality. I mean, one of the arguments that's used against this is just simply prolonging the suffering of a child, but that's not what the statistics show, is it?
No, it's quite the opposite. The babies who are born alive, like Jessica Jane, for 80 minutes in a steri dish, that is prolonging the suffering of the child. And so, at the very least, Jessica Jane should have been given pain relief. That is proper care. But it's quite the opposite. Yeah.
One of the other things I think that's often used against this, and we have seen states around the country that have adopted this as part of broader reform, if you like, late-term abortion bills. Certainly in South Australia, this one of the very few good things that came out of that piece of legislation was this sort of protection at state level.
Yes.
But that's not the case across the country. And one of the things which is used to push back on adopting these sorts of laws is this myth that somehow once the baby is kept alive, then they'll just be handed back to the mother, and therefore you're infringing on women's, rights. That's not the case with this bill, and that's not what the Australian Christian Lobby are suggesting should happen, is it?
Not at all, because the mother is in a distressed state as well. We know that a number of late-term abortions happen for psychosocial reasons, so there's nothing wrong with the baby, but the mother is in some distress, and so the baby is aborted for a psychosocial reason. But as Michelle said, we would say that there should be an advocate straight away for that baby. I mean, I'm not saying that babies should be born so that childless couples can get a baby, but we all know that there are a lot of childless couples who would just be lining up outside a hospital if they thought a baby was going to die without care. Yeah. So we're not at all advocating. We find, we're the Australian Christian Lobby, so we follow Jesus Christ, who was the most compassionate person of all and remains that. So our mandate is to be compassionate. So there are many reasons why a woman will choose an abortion, and we have compassion for that. We would want to be absolutely compassionate to the woman.
And we realise there is that gap between when the woman has the abortion and the baby is, which may be alive, the baby needs an advocate straight away. So there could be some sort of provision where an advocate is provided immediately from whatever Department of Child Protection relevant to the state, so that somebody is immediately brought in to care for the best interests of the child.
Yeah. And just finally, this issue of Australia's obligations regarding the rights of children under the International Covenant on the Rights of the Child. I mean, at the moment, as it stands, it would appear that states that aren't providing this sort of care would potentially be in breach of those obligations. This bill, would seek to bring us into line with our international obligations, in your mind?
Very clearly, we are in direct opposition to what it says we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Antic. Because Mr. De Lima has joined us, I did just want in the last little while to give him an opportunity to make an opening statement. So
Could I just ask one question of the witnesses at
Sure,
the table?
Senator.
And
Yes.
First of all, some submitters have suggested that passing the bill would contravene the rights of women and girls. Can you talk to me through what your view of that might be?
So every human being has equal rights. So again, I think it comes back to the decision as to whether a baby that is born alive and is independent from their mother, is that baby a human being? Is that baby a child? And if it is, then they have equal rights. So we can't disregard the rights of the mother, certainly, but neither can we disregard the rights of another human being. So they both have equal rights, and I don't see any conflict there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Urquhart. Mr. De Lima, if you would like to make an opening statement, this is your opportunity to do so.
The summary of our submission really is as follows. We echo the reference to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I point out that Australia was an original signatory to that, which provides a double moral imperative. A child who survives abortion has a right to life. And in 1990, of course, we signed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that says that states parties shall ensure to the maximum extent possible the survival and development of the child. And I would like to read a statement which has come to me just this week. It is from an elderly lady, and her name is Denise Cameron. And the way she's expressed herself is in both the first and third person, but I read it as she has sent it to me. Dear Mr. De Lima, my name is Denise Cameron. I am a retired nurse/midwife who in the early 1970s nursed for 3 years in the premature baby unit and later in the labour ward of a large women's hospital in Melbourne. It was in the premature baby unit that I witnessed what was a life-changing experience. I feel compelled to ask you on my behalf, in my absence due to my family carer's role, to share with the Committee of Inquiry on the Born Alive Infants Bill this real-life incident in my nursing career in memory of this little boy and as an appeal to have corrected such human rights breaches as are suffered by similar babies born alive today. I feel very deeply that I owe this to them, and thank you and the committee for this opportunity to speak on their behalf. Denise M. Cameron, retired general nurse/midwife/infant welfare certificate. Denise had been nursing 9 years when she recalls a very distressing situation in the city hospital in which she worked. Denise was a general trained nurse wife and midwife when she relocated from the country to the city to further her nursing experience, gaining a certificate in maternal and child welfare, after which she joined the staff of a 46-cot premature baby unit. She never forgot her first day there, escaping to the outside balcony of the fire exit to shed a few tears. The unit's charge nurse had informed the staff that a very premature baby was to be admitted from the operating theatre where it had failed to die in the kidney dish into which it was placed after a hysterectomy, in brackets, mini caesarean abortion. The hysterectomy had been performed by the obstetrician on an overseas-born mother suffering with toxemia, which would have necessitated bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. We were told the husband didn't want his wife bedridden for the remainder of the pregnancy. Denise understood that given the obstetrician believed the mother to be 20 weeks gestation, he could have advised hospitalisation. Social workers could have organised support for the father, and he could have monitored her condition for as many weeks as her condition indicated before inducing labour or performing a caesarean section and handing the baby over to a paediatrician to save. The obstetrician estimated the woman to be 20 weeks gestation, but his calculation was out by about 8 weeks. The baby weighed 1 pound 12 ounces and was ultimately assessed to have been of 28 weeks gestation, not 20. The long time in the cold kidney dish had greatly disadvantaged him. He was placed in a humidicrib to keep warm and comfortable, but his prognosis was thought to be very bleak. To the medical and nursing staff's amazement, he was still there the next day and the day after and another day. He clung on with what little might he had to his life. His progress in the premature baby unit was not without multiple setbacks and even mishaps. He once fell out of the humidicrib after the sleeve was left open, with seemingly no ill effects. He suffered severe jaundice. He looked positively green at one time, but he had his own little tenacious personality and recovered from setback after setback, the worry always being that these would affect his physical and mental health in later life. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, weeks into months, and finally the baby was discharged home to his parents' care. Denise always wondered how he fared after that. Did he ultimately die? Did he grow up into a little boy, a teenager, or an adult? The miscalculation of his gestation in utero and the neglect he suffered by being placed in a cold kidney dish and not immediately into a humidicrib, she felt was a terrible injustice to this little boy. It was as if he, quote, stared them down, unquote, she said, until embarrassed, the obstetrician was forced to hand his, quote, mistake, unquote, to a paediatrician to correct. Who knows just what a challenge his parents faced with such a delicate child when they took him home. Whatever, his start in life was truly disadvantaged. He deserved better. She can still see him vividly and remember his name years later. and is haunted by the thought that there are still babies out there lying in cold kidney dishes, crying for their mothers, but left to die by a supposedly caring profession manipulated by amoral legislators. Quote, we like to think of ourselves as a compassionate society, but this is inhumane and must be stopped, unquote, she pleads. But that ends the testimony of the lady that's communicated with me, Denise M. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr De Silva. We are due to move to our next witnesses shortly, but I just wanted to give an opportunity for questions. Senator Canavan.
I just have one quick follow-up. I mentioned earlier the statistics about how often late-term abortions end in a baby born alive. I just wanted to come back, Ms Francis, or anyone else on the phone as well. To your knowledge, are mothers provided that the probabilistic risk of that occurrence? So when I go get anaesthesia, I'm told, hey, there's a such and such a chance that this could kill you, and you've got to make a decision whether you do that or not. Mothers likewise given informed consent here about the risks of a termination procedure ending in a baby born alive.
Not to my knowledge at all, no.
Okay, if there's no one else, thank you, Jeff.
Were there any questions for Mr De Silva?
Look, I think given the time, I'm okay, but yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Francis, and thank you, Mrs Pearce, for your testimony today.
Very much.